There is a particular kind of evil that believes its own efficiency. Not the evil of passion. Passion is stupid. It leaves evidence. It confesses itself in the heat of the thing. The evil that believes its own efficiency is colder than that. It is the evil of a plan executed well, of a problem identified and solved cleanly, of the specific, organized satisfaction of people who have looked at another human being and decided they were an obstacle, and then removed the obstacle with what they would describe to themselves as a pragmatic clarity. The Dowager Duchess of Blackwood and her son Gregory had looked at Lisa's inheritance, specifically at the several £100,000 that had cleared into their account the morning after the wedding. And they had made their assessment with pragmatic clarity they believed distinguished them from the merely passionate. They had arranged the carriage accident on a Tuesday. By Thursday, they had been satisfied. They had between them the specific kind of satisfaction that efficient people feel when a plan has worked. Not gloating, not cruelty, simply the settled, closed account quality of something that has been taken care of. Lisa was gone. The money was theirs. There was nothing further to address. They had been wrong about the nothing further, because Lisa had not died. She had survived with the specific, inconvenient stubbornness of someone who had not been consulted about the plan for her death, and who had, in the years since, been using the time they had given her, the time of her supposed absence, the time of their settled satisfaction, to construct something considerably more thorough than a carriage going over a cliff. She had been constructing a reckoning. Before we get to the ballroom, before we get to the King's Gala, and the slapped glass and the Dowager, standing up in front of the entire peerage and confessing loudly to a room full of witnesses, I need to ask you something. If you survived something that was meant to kill you, if you came back from a cliff's edge that someone you trusted had pushed you toward, would you return with a weapon? Or would you return with something more patient than a weapon? Drop your answer in the comments, because Lisa returned with neither a sword nor a scream. She returned with a position, a ledger, and 2 years of documentation, and she chose as her primary instrument not violence, but the specific, terrible truth that Gregory and the Dowager were already afraid of each other. She simply gave their fear somewhere to go. Subscribe and hit the bell. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. Your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room now. Let's begin. The inheritance had been the point from the beginning. This was not, in retrospect, something Lisa had been unable to see. The signs had been present in the courtship, in the specific quality of Gregory's attention to her family's financial situation, in the way the marriage negotiations had moved with a speed that was flattering at the time and which, she understood later, as the speed of people who have a deadline. The deadline was the inheritance clearing. The moment the inheritance cleared was the moment the marriage had served its purpose. She had understood this in the weeks before the accident, in the way one sometimes understands things without fully arriving at the understanding. A growing quality of unease, a specific pattern of interactions that had the character of people conducting something rather than living something. She had not, at that point, understood the specific form the conclusion would take. She had understood that she was in a house that did not, in some fundamental way, contain her. The accident had clarified things considerably. The carriage had gone over the cliff on the Eastern Road, which was the road she took to visit her family's solicitor. A road she took regularly, a road the driver knew, a road that had a section of unguarded edge above a ravine that a person who knew the road well would understand was the correct location for what they intended to do with it. The driver had not survived. Lisa had survived because the carriage had come to rest against an outcropping of rock 30 feet below the road's edge, because she had been thrown clear of the worst of the impact, and because the woman who found her, a farmer's wife from the valley below, a woman who had heard the sound and investigated without waiting for someone else to investigate first, had not been deterred by the condition she found Lisa in from beginning the work of keeping her alive. She had been in the valley for 6 weeks before she was able to form a complete sentence. She had been there for 4 months before she was able to walk without assistance. She had been there for a year before she had assembled, from the fragments of what she had observed in the months before the accident, and the information her loyal solicitor provided from the city, the full picture of what had been done to her and by whom. The year had given her time to think. She thought about anger. She thought about it with the specific, measured attention of a woman who has been given a significant amount of uninterrupted time to think about one thing, and she concluded that anger was not the organizing principle she intended to build on. Anger was hot, and hot things were visible, and visible things gave warning. She thought about what she actually wanted, which was not merely Gregory and the Dowager's destruction. What she wanted was more precise than destruction. She wanted the truth told. She wanted the truth told in a room from which it could not be suppressed, to an audience that could not be managed, in a form that was undeniable. She wanted the confession. Not because she needed the confession. She knew what they had done, but because the confession was the form of truth that could not be revoked, that could not be denied later, that would sit in the public record permanently. To get the confession, she needed them to confess. To get them to confess, she needed them afraid of each other. And to make them afraid of each other, she needed a position from which she could observe them closely enough to understand exactly what they were already afraid of and supply it with direction. The position at the bank was the elegance of the plan. The Blackwood family's primary financial institution had a vacancy at the senior oversight level, a position that managed the family accounts as part of a broader portfolio of aristocratic clients, a position whose occupant would have access to the family's financial records, communication patterns, and the specific granular detail of how the money moved and where. She had qualifications for the position that she had not possessed 2 years ago, because the 2 years of recovery had included 2 years of intensive study in financial law, conducted with the specific, focused energy of a woman who understood exactly what she intended to use the study for. She presented herself under a different name, with a slightly altered appearance, not dramatically different, not theatrical, but different in the ways that matter when someone is looking at you without expecting you. The hair, the spectacles she did not previously wear, the specific quality of composure that was different from the quality she had possessed before the cliff, which was the quality of someone who has been through something significant and has organized herself around the surviving of it. She was hired. She took the position. She waited. Lady Evelyn arrived at the manor in March, bright, trusting, entirely innocent of everything that had made the manor what it was, walking into a fairy tale she had every reason to believe was one, because nothing about the presentation of the Blackwood family in the months before the wedding had given her cause to believe otherwise. Lisa, from her position at the bank, watched Evelyn move into the manor with the specific, complicated feeling of a woman observing the next target of the people who had tried to kill her. She was not going to let Evelyn become Lisa. This was not sentiment. It was the practical reality that Evelyn, innocent and ignorant and now legally bound to Gregory, was going to need to be extracted from the family before the extraction became as complicated as Lisa's had been. But first, the confession. 2. Sowing the seeds of paranoia. The Dowager's deepest fear was loss of control. Lisa had understood this in the year of her recovery, had assembled it from the fragments of observation across the months before the accident, from the specific quality of the Dowager's management of her son, which was not the management of a woman who trusted her son, but the management of a woman who understood that her son, left to his own judgment, was a liability she could not afford. The Dowager had built Gregory. She had constructed him strategically over decades, and the construction had produced a man who was effective at the things she had designed him to be effective at, and entirely incapable of the things she had not designed him for. She controlled him because she had to control him. She was afraid of losing control, because losing control meant losing the thing she had built her entire life around. Gregory's deepest fear was his mother. Not in the simple way, not the fear of a child who has not grown up, though there were elements of that, in the specific, sophisticated way of a man who knows, with the intimacy of a person raised by someone very intelligent, that the person who built him is the person most capable of dismantling him. He was afraid of her because he understood her. He understood that her loyalty to him was instrumental, the loyalty of someone who has invested in a project and whose welfare depended on the project's success. And he understood, somewhere underneath the surfaces he maintained, that the instrumentality could go in the other direction, that she could decide, if the arithmetic changed, that dismantling him was more efficient than maintaining him. Lisa gave both of these fears a specific, concrete form. The forged letter appeared on Gregory's desk on a Tuesday morning. It was in the Dowager's handwriting, which Lisa had practiced from documents she had accessed through the bank, the specific reproduction of a handwriting so familiar to her that she could produce it in the dark. The letter was brief and clinical and written in exactly the tone the Dowager used for strategic correspondence, direct, cold, without sentiment, organized around the question of advantage. The letter suggested that Evelyn's fortune was the family's real future, and that Gregory's management of it required oversight, and that the mechanisms for providing that oversight, legal mechanisms specifically, the kind that required a finding of mental incapacity, were worth exploring. Not that she was planning this, that she was considering whether it was worth exploring. The distinction was the Dowager's specific register. She never said she was going to do something. She said she was considering whether it was worth doing, which left her room to retreat from any position while still communicating the threat, clearly enough for the recipient to understand it as one. Gregory read it 3 times. He recognized his mother's voice in every word of it. He put it in his desk drawer and said nothing at breakfast. The Dowager received the financial statement on a Wednesday. It was a summary, prepared with the specific authority of the bank's official letterhead, which Lisa had access to, of an account she had not previously known existed, held in Gregory's name, into which a significant sum had been transferred over the past 6 months in increments small enough to avoid automatic review flags. The account was at a distant branch. The transfers were documented with the clean, organized clarity of someone who had been careful not to be caught. Accompanying the statement was a property summary, a dower house, rural, distant, in a state of considerable disrepair. The kind of property a person was sent to when the people responsible for them wanted them removed from the primary estate without the social inconvenience of a more visible exile. The Dowager looked at these documents with the specific, white-hot quality of a woman encountering a betrayal that she had, somewhere in the back of her strategic mind, always considered possible, and had chosen not to consider directly, because considering it directly would have required her to acknowledge the vulnerability. She considered it now. She put the documents in her correspondence box and went to dinner with the composed, managed expression she brought to every occasion where composure was the tool. At dinner, she looked at Gregory. He looked at her. They were the people who had, together, pushed a carriage over a cliff. They were the people who had, together, toasted with champagne over an empty grave. They were the people who understood each other with the specific, uncomfortable intimacy of people who share a secret that could destroy them both. And now they were people who were afraid of each other. Lisa, who had arranged the seating, so that her bank position gave her occasion to be at a peripheral, that evening stood in the corridor outside the dining room and listened to the silence, which was louder than most conversations. The aristocratic tea party was at Lady Cavendish's townhouse, which was one of the most observed social spaces of the season. The kind of gathering whose attendees understood that what happened there would be reported, discussed, and filed away in the social memory of the ton with the thoroughness that significant things received. The Dowager chose it deliberately. She had decided, across the 2 weeks since the financial statement, that the most efficient counter to Gregory's apparent plan to banish her was to establish Evelyn's loyalty to herself directly, to position herself as Evelyn's natural ally, the experienced matriarch who understood the family, who could offer the new duchess the guidance that her inexperienced husband could not, and therefore to make herself indispensable to the source of the fortune Gregory was apparently planning to use to exile her. The plan was coherent, given the information she had. The execution was catastrophic, given the audience. She made the comment about Evelyn's breeding loudly enough to be heard across the tea table. Lacks the breeding to manage the Blackwood legacy. In the specific, confident register of a woman who believes she is establishing authority and is not yet aware that authority requires its audience to be on your side. The audience was not on her side. The audience was on the side of Lady Evelyn, who was gentle and kind, and had done nothing in the months of her marriage to produce any feeling in the ton other than the warm regard extended to someone who is clearly a good person in a house that had not been, even before this moment, without certain rumours attached to it. Gregory heard about the comment within 40 minutes. He arrived at his interpretation of it, his mother, alarmed by his plan to exile her, striking at Evelyn's social position to undermine her value to him, attempting to use the social world to neutralize Evelyn as a resource before Gregory could deploy her within an additional 20 minutes. He exploded at his mother in the library that evening in the specific, volcanic register of a man who has been afraid for 2 weeks and has finally found an occasion that permits him to express the fear as something that looks like righteous anger. She responded with the specific Arctic quality of a woman who is genuinely afraid and is expressing the fear as something that looks like contemptuous authority. They screamed at each other behind closed doors in language that was, for people who had always been careful about what they said and where they said it, remarkable in its explicitness. Lisa stood in the corridor outside the library and listened with the cold, precise attention of a woman conducting an audit. The confession was forming. It was not ready yet, but its components were assembling. She required an audience of maximum consequence. She required a trigger of maximum pressure. She required both of them to arrive at the event she had been constructing toward in a state of such compressed mutual terror that the smallest additional pressure would produce the specific, public, irrevocable explosion she needed. The King's Gala was in 3 weeks. She had work to do. The King's Gala was the social apex of the year, the event that organized everything else around itself, the occasion at which the peerage assembled in full, at which royalty was present, at which the public record of who one was and what one's standing was received its annual formal notation. It was, Lisa had concluded 18 months ago when she had begun constructing the endgame of her campaign, the only room in England that was simultaneously witnessed by enough significant people and protected by enough institutional authority that what happened inside, it could not be managed away afterward. Whatever was said in the presence of the king could not be subsequently denied to the king's household. Whatever was witnessed by the full peerage could not be subsequently revised in the social memory of the ton. Whatever was confessed in that room was confessed permanently. She needed them both in that room. She needed them both at the absolute limit of what they could contain. She had spent 3 weeks providing the final pressure. The document that reached Gregory 30 seconds before he entered the ballroom had been prepared with the specific, clean authority of official legal correspondence, the Blackwood family solicitor's letterhead, which she had access to through the bank's document management system, the specific formatting of an estate transfer notice, the signature of the relevant official reproduced with the accuracy that 2 years of practice had produced. The document stated that the Dowager had, 48 hours ago, transferred the Blackwood title and the primary estate to Gregory's cousin on the grounds of Gregory's documented instability, citing the same legal mechanisms the forged letter had mentioned 2 weeks ago. Not planning to explore, done. Gregory read it in the entry corridor of Carlton House with the expression of a man whose worst fear has arrived in his hands in physical form, confirmed in black and white on official letterhead, 30 seconds before he had to enter a room full of the most powerful people in England and perform normality. The vial that reached the Dowager arrived through her personal maid, a new girl, hired recently, whose loyalties the Dowager had not yet had occasion to test, and who had been, in this case, entirely irrelevant to the operation, because the vial had been placed in the maid's coat pocket without the maid's knowledge. with a note addressed to the dowager, positioned to fall out when the coat was removed in the cloakroom. The note said that Gregory had acquired the vial from an apothecary on the Strand and intended to introduce its contents to her wine at the earliest opportunity to remove her from the equation permanently, and that the source of this information was someone who had no interest in seeing the her dowager destroyed and who was providing this intelligence as a professional courtesy. The vial contained water. The dowager held it in the cloakroom with the specific, comprehensive terror of a woman who has spent 30 years managing every variable of her situation and has, in this moment, encountered a variable she did not manage. She went into the ballroom. Gregory went into the ballroom. Evelyn went in beside them with the specific, anxious quality she had been carrying for weeks. The quality of a woman who is aware that something is deeply wrong in the household she has married into, and who does not yet have the information to understand what it is. The king's toast began. Lisa watched from the gallery above. The position she had arranged through the bank's institutional connections, which gave her a legitimate reason to be present at an event whose guest list was otherwise tightly managed. She watched Gregory watch his mother. She watched the dowager reach for her wine. She watched Gregory's compressed, 2-week terror of a mother he believed had just legally stolen his title, colliding with the sight of the woman he had been told intended to poison him reaching for a glass near his wife. She watched him calculate, in the space of approximately 2 seconds, that everything he feared was happening simultaneously in this room. She watched him stand up. He said, "You tried to poison me to take my crown, just like you planned to destroy Lisa." He said it in the voice of a man who has passed the point where the volume of what he is experiencing can be contained by the volume he is producing, who has exceeded his own management capacity, who is standing in the middle of the most witnessed room in England, producing the specific, terrible clarity of a person who has lost control and whose losing of it is revealing everything that the control was concealing. The ballroom registered this with the collective quality of a room encountering something that has broken every available protocol simultaneously, and for which no protocol exists, which is the specific, total silence of a space that has suspended its ordinary functions to witness something that supersedes them. The dowager stood. She had spent 30 years being the person who controlled situations. She had spent 30 years being the person whose voice organized rooms. She had spent 30 years being the architect of Gregory's career, of the family's social position, of the specific managed image of the Blackwood house that had allowed it to move through the world with the authority she had built for it. She had never been in a room where all of that had ceased to be available to her simultaneously. She screamed. Not the managed voice, not the Arctic authority, not the specific register of a woman who understands how to deploy her voice as an instrument. The scream of a woman who has lost everything at once and whose body is expressing this in the only language it currently has access to. "I made you a duke. You would be nothing without me. I am the one who orchestrated the carriage accident to rid us of that useless girl, Lisa. You are a cowardly boy." The words filled the ballroom of Carlton House in the presence of the king, the full peerage, and 200 witnesses. They were not retrievable. The room received them with the specific, frozen quality of an audience that has witnessed something it will not forget, because it cannot forget it, because the memory has been burned into every person present by the sheer, extraordinary nature of what just happened. The specific quality of a confession delivered at maximum volume in the maximum possible audience by someone who did not intend to confess and cannot take it back. Evelyn stumbled backward. She stumbled into the crowd with the specific, physical quality of a person whose understanding of their own life has just been replaced, entirely and without warning, by a different and far more terrible understanding. She had been in a house of murderers. She had been sleeping in the rooms and eating at the tables and believing herself to be in a marriage of a particular kind, and the particular kind had been a lie constructed on the blood of the woman the people around her had tried to kill. The room was still silent. The king's guards, who were present as they always were at events of this kind, had the specific, professional quality of men who understood that they were witnessing something that required action, and who were looking for the shape of that action at the room's senior authority figures. The doors opened. Lisa had been precise about the timing. The doors opened when they opened, because she had given the signal to open them when the confession was complete, and the room was still, and the moment was the moment, not before and not after. The precise moment at which her entrances would arrive vied not as a dramatic gesture, but as the logical, inevitable conclusion of everything that had just occurred. She walked down the center aisle. She walked in the black velvet gown with the composed, unhurried quality of a woman who is walking towards something she has been constructing for 2 years, and who is, in the walking, entirely present in the arriving. She was 31 years old. She had been pushed over a cliff. She had survived in a valley for 6 months. She had spent 2 years learning financial law, acquiring a position, managing information, constructing the specific conditions that would produce the specific outcome she required. And she had done all of it without the institutional resources of a duke or the network of a dowager, with the resources of herself and the people who had helped her, and the specific, patient, exact intelligence of a woman who had decided that accuracy was the point. She was standing in front of the king's guards. She looked at Gregory. She looked at the dowager. She looked at them with the expression that had replaced, 2 years ago, whatever expression she had worn before the cliff. Not hatred, not triumph, not the hot satisfaction of a revenge delivered dramatically. The clear, precise expression of a woman who has completed something and is acknowledging its completion. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said to the room, to the witnesses, to the record that would be made of this evening, to the permanent document of what had been said. By whom, in the presence of what authority? "I believe you heard their confession." She looked at the guards. "Arrest them." They were arrested. Not immediately. The institutional machinery of a room like this one required a moment to absorb what it had witnessed and to locate the correct process for responding to it, and that moment was filled with the specific, ambient quality of a room that has understood something irrevocable and is adjusting to the understanding. But the machinery found its process. The process was applied. The guards moved with the efficiency of people who have been given a clear instruction in an unambiguous situation. Gregory was pale. He had the specific comprehensive pallor of a man who has understood that the thing he has most feared, exposure, the removal of the structure he depended on, has arrived not as something he could manage, but as something that produced itself from the inside of his own house, through the mechanisms of his own fear. The dowager was the specific quality of still that comes after the storm of a confession. The stillness of a person who has said the unsayable and cannot retrieve it, who is standing in the exact center of the destruction they have produced, stripped of the 30 years of management that had made them powerful, reduced to the simple, unadorned fact of what they had done. They were removed from the room. They were screaming at each other as they were removed. Even now, even in the act of being taken away together, they were accusing, each producing the specific, desperate language of people who cannot stop blaming because stopping the blaming would require facing the thing they had both been responsible for and facing it together without the benefit of the other as a convenient target was not something either of them had the capacity for. They left the ballroom cursing each other's names. Lisa turned to Evelyn. Evelyn was in the crowd where she had stumbled, still there, being steadied by a woman near her who had caught her in the stumbling, looking at Lisa with the specific wide-eyed quality of someone whose world has just been entirely revised and who is still processing the revision. Lisa crossed to her. She did not speak at length. There would be time for the full account, for everything Evelyn needed to know about the house she had married into and what had been done before she arrived. There would be time for the solicitor and the legal arrangements and the specific, practical business of extracting Evelyn from a marriage that had been built on a crime. For now, she simply looked at her. She offered a nod, not warm in the theatrical sense, but genuine in the specific sense of one woman acknowledging another in the aftermath of a significant thing. The acknowledgement of a person what it is to have been inside a house of monsters without knowing it, and who is communicating that the inside is over. Evelyn received it. She stood up straighter. Lisa turned back to the room. The room was looking at her with the specific collective quality of an audience that has witnessed something extraordinary and, that is, in the witnessing, recalibrating its understanding of what is possible. The woman they had understood to be dead, the 2 years of what she had not been doing, which was being dead. The specific, exact intelligence of the campaign she had conducted from a position no one had suspected, using the tools available to her. Information, access, patient, expert, understanding of 2 frightened people's interior geography to produce the outcome with the precision of a woman who had been very thorough about knowing what she wanted and how to get it. She stood in the ballroom of Carlton House, in the black velvet gown, under the chandeliers that were doing what chandeliers did, distributing the light with the generous indifference of things that illuminate, without discrimination, giving what they had to give to whoever was standing beneath them. She was beneath them now. She had not begged for it. She had not been given it back by the people who had taken it. She had simply built, across 2 years in the dark, a structure that produced, when completed, this moment, the restoration of the thing that was hers, accomplished by the specific, irrevocable instrument of their own confession, which they had provided themselves, in this room, to this audience, permanently. A house built on blood and betrayal, burning from the inside out, and she had not had to light a single match. Tell me in the comments, which moment stayed with you? Was it the carriage and the valley, the forged letters that turned them on each other, Gregory seeing his mother reach for the glass, the dowager standing up and screaming the confession, or Lisa walking down the center aisle at the exact right moment? Drop it below. I want to know what you are carrying from this one. And tell me where you are watching from, your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room tonight. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the next story opens with a woman who spent 3 years in exile, learning everything she was never supposed to know, and who returns on the morning of her supposed death's official anniversary. Not to the people who harmed her, but to the one person who had nothing to do with it, who believed she was dead, who has been grieving her this whole time. And what she does before she reveals herself to anyone else is the whole first act. I'll see you there.